Hi, you guys. I'm happy to see all of you guys here today for an exciting talk. So today is kind of a little bit special because we're here to celebrate Bat Appreciation Day, which is usually observed this year will be on April 17th. And so it was created by the Bat Conservation International to emphasize the vital role that bats play on our environment and inspire support for their conservation. These remarkable yet often misunderstood creatures help maintain ecological balance by controlling pests, pollinating plants, and dispersal seeds. Celebrating bats encourage efforts to protect their habitats and ensure their survival, ultimately sustaining biodiversity in a healthy natural world. This day is important. This day is an opportunity to debunk myths from these magnificent creatures, dependent our understanding of bats and recognize their essential contribution to the planet. And so today, we have the lovely pleasure of having Brad R. Blood, who has his PhD, is a senior biologist at Psomas, and a research associate in mammalogy at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. He earned his bachelor's degree in zoology and master's degree in biology at California State University of Long Beach, yay beach, and his PhD at the University of Southern California, studying under the curator of mammals at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. His PhD thesis was on the evolution of fish catching in bats and ecomorphological studies on convergent adaptations to a unique feeding strategy. He has published articles on the mammal of Los Angeles County, allometric growth in coyotes, springhares in Botswana, small mammals in Namibia, bats in Southeast Asia, elephants, shrews, cotton rats, and a fish-eating Myotis. Most recently, he has published a guide to the terrestrial mammals of Southern California and the southeastern Sierra Nevadas. So with that, I will let Brad take over.
Thank you, Anita. I appreciate you asking me to join you here today, and I will start sharing my screen. Let's see if I can make this work. All right. So I assume I am sharing my screen?
Yes, you are good to go.
Okay. So thank you all for having me here today. And let's see if I can put this on so I can actually see the screen. Oh, good. So I'm here to talk to you today about one of my favorite critters, which is the marine bat of Baja, California, Myotis vivesi. This was the subject of my dissertation work. Quite a unique animal. Let's see if I can get this. Let's see if I can get this to work. Oh, there we go. So before I get started, I'd like to sort of introduce you to how I'm going to go about this presentation. So I'd like to introduce you to bats in general, the order Chiroptera, which means kangaroo. The kind of bats that there are two major groups of bats. There are what are called megabats, which means big bats. And there are microbats, which means smaller bats, of course. Then introduce you to some basic bat anatomy and terminology, which will come in very handy as I go through the rest of the talk. I'll introduce you to the main character of the talk, Myotis vivesi. Talk about where it lives, some of the physical characteristics of the bat, which is very important to how it lives and how it makes its living and why it's so unique. Talk a little bit about its ecology, how it forages, which is how it makes its living, its food resources, which are very unique. Where it roosts, which is also very unique, at least for this bat. A little bit about its physiology, how it's adapted itself to its marine lifestyle, a little bit about its reproduction, and then at the end, a little bit on notes on fish catching bats in general. We'll have some ending notes and then some acknowledgements. So I think now is a good time to get started. So bats. Bats are the main order Chiroptera, which, as I said, which is the only order capable of powered flight. Mammals, the only mammals capable of powered flight. There are currently, the way it stands now, there are over 1,400 species of bats in total. New species being added all the time. They are found worldwide except for the Arctic regions and the far north, sort of the tundra regions in that. They don't really like the cold, and I can't say as I blame them. And as I said earlier, there are two main groups of bats. There are megabats and microbats. So let's talk a little bit about megabats. So the megabats are in the family Theropodidae, also known as the flying foxes. And if you look at the picture here that we have, the Indian flying fox, Pteropus giganteus, which means it's a really big Pteropus, also known as the Indian flying fox. And you look at their little cute faces here, you can see why they're called the flying fox. And in German, they're called Fladerhund, which means flying hound, and you can see why. They got that little dog-like flying that face. Not a big group of bats, approximately 196 species. They are relegated to the old world. You can see the little map here. Africa and Asia, some in Australia. They do not echolocate like the microbats. We'll talk about that in a little bit, except for one exception. There is a one genus, one species in particular, Myotis vivesi, which has a form of echolocation, but it's not true echolocation. It kind of, when it's in an enclosed space, it'll sort of click its tongue. And it'll click its tongue, sort of listening for the echo. But it's not echolocation in the sense that we think of it or the other bats. And it's kind of like if you're walking down a hallway and you can sort of hear noise bouncing off. It's sort of that kind of echolocation. This group of bats really relies on vision and their sense of smell in the world. They have a very sensitive sense of smell, which comes in handy because a lot of these bats eat ripe fruit, and so they can smell ripe fruit from a very large distance. And a lot of them have become agricultural pests because they will descend upon agricultural groves and eat a lot of fruit. They're very vocal, a lot of them, communicate by very loud vocalizations. Some of them can be very gregarious and released by the hundreds, if not thousands. So they can make a lot of noise when they're found together in these large groups, like the Indian flying fox, reaching very large numbers in trees. Like I said, they eat fruit and nectar. Some of them are very important pollinators. They pollinate over 500 species of tropical fruits, plants, and trees. And these bats in particular are the largest bats, and can be the largest bats in the world. The pterodon can have a wingspan of up to 6 feet and weigh over 3 pounds, and that's quite a large bat. And that one is found in the Philippines. It's really quite an amazing looking bat. So let's talk about the microbats. This is the other large group of bats, and this really is the largest group of bats. Suborder Microchiroptera. There's 17 families in this group, approximately 1,278 species. There's more now than when I made this talk up. They're found all over the world, on all the continents except Antarctica. Like I said, they don't like the cold. I can't particularly blame them. There is a wide variety of diets involved in the Microchiroptera. There are insect eaters. They eat pollen, fruit, nectar, leaves, mud eaters, the spiders, vertebrates, and of course fish, which is the topic of what I'm going to talk about later. I always found that the spider-eating bats are particularly interesting in my mind. We used to think that this particular bat, Synotinus phoniscus, which I love the name of that particular one, we used to think they were very rare. You couldn't catch them, even so we thought they were very rare. Well, as it turns out, one of the ways you go to get bats, for those of you that are used to looking at birds, is you put up these things called mist nets, or square nylon mesh nets, and you put them up on the water features and places where bats fly, and bats fly into them, and you capture them and you process them. But we couldn't get this particular kind of bat with those nets. When we developed a different kind of trap, which was called a harp trap, and we used piano wire, offset it, and we had a plastic holder underneath, they caught all sorts of them. Well, then as it turns out, it makes perfect sense because mist nets look like spider webs, and so the little bats would fly up to these mist nets and just fly over the top and go away. I always thought that was a really great and interesting story, and shows how adaptable these bats are. Would fly up to what they thought were spider webs and fly around. So, that's pretty cool. Bats are pretty adaptable. Anyway, these bats, microbats, vary in size from the very tiny little bumblebee bat, Brachionicterus thalongi, named after a very famous Thai biologist, Kitty thalongi, Kitty thalong, not thalongi. And it's only 1.3 inches long and it's only 0.07 ounces. Very tiny little bat. Found only in Southeast Asia. Two, the American false vampire bat, Vampiro spectrum, with a wingspan of 3 feet, weighs nearly half a pound. This is a really large and very interesting bat that has, I'll show you a picture of it here in a moment. It's a very interesting bat, but very large. It's the largest bat in the Americas, in the Western Hemisphere. Over here to the side, we have a nice little picture of Townsend's bearded bat, Coriolanus townsendii, which is in California a species of special concern. A little bit more on the Microchiroptera. These bats do echolocate in what we think of as echolocation when we think of bats. This means they emit sound which is above human hearing. We don't hear it. These bats can emit sounds that we can hear, but this is not echolocation. That's what we call ultrasound. So these are very high frequency sounds. These are important pollinators. They pollinate crops. For those of you like margaritas on the islands, they pollinate the blue agaves in Mexico, which is where tequila comes from. So that's one reason to appreciate bats. I'm not much of a drinker myself, but I know a lot of people do. But they also pollinate other important things, such as cashews, bananas, mangoes, guavas, and many others. So there's a lot of reasons to appreciate these bats. Some of them are solitary, as we talked about in the megabats, but some of them are gregarious and live in very huge colonies. The bats in the background of this picture are Brazilian or Mexican free-tailed bats, Tadariga braziliensis, and they live in colonies up to millions. which have been made famous by the bats living called caverns in New Mexico or the Congress Bridge in Austin, Texas, where people go every night to watch these bats exit from the roost. And these bats, they go out and forage at night and consume up to 250 tons of insects nightly. Many of those are mosquitoes or can be mosquitoes, which is another reason, because I don't particularly like mosquitoes. So another reason to appreciate that. So there are a wide variety of microbats. I'll just have put together a few photographs of some just to show you the variety of them. Let me see if I can move this out of the way a little bit. The common vamp is interesting for many other reasons. The fact that it eats blood. Desmodus rotundus is found in Mexico, Central America. It feeds on domestic animals, cattle, horses, the occasional camper that leaves themselves exposed. They're interesting in that they land on the ground near whatever they're going to feed on. They hop around and literally climb up the animal until they find a place where they can sense blood vessel. They have a way to sense where parts of the skin is warmer than the other, and then they they don't bite, they sort of scrape a spot. Their incisors, which you can see my cursor right here, are triangular shaped. So they're like this. And they sort of scrape out a spot and leave a sort of a triangular shaped scrape, and then they lick the blood from the wound, and their saliva has an anticoagulant in it. So as they lick, the more they lick, the more it bleeds. And then when they're full, they fly off and go back to their colony. And this is really interesting. So then once they stop licking at the wound, we'll eventually fill in and scab over. What's interesting is that, and there's in terms of the social behaviors that they share. If there are ill individuals or older individuals, they'll share blood, take care of each other, which is really interesting. Also, there's only 3 kinds of vampires. All over the world, and the other two species feed on birds. This particular one I have a picture of only feeds on mammals, and actually feeding on marine mammals, which is really interesting. So didn't start feeding on domestic cattle, things like that, till the Spanish brought them over. But anyway, super interesting animals, really adapted to moving around on the ground, amazing ability to hop and maneuver on the ground. Really super interesting little critters. Next to them in the middle here on the top is Eudroma bilobata, the tent-making bat. These are really cute little guys. Feed on fruit. So they'll go to like fig trees and all that. They'll grab the fruit, mash it up, fly around, spit the seeds out. So they're very important in spreading seeds around the tropical forest. And they'll land in something like a banana tree, and they'll chew on the ribs of the leaves and collapse the leaves around them, making their own tents, which is pretty amazing. So they'll live among groups like this, which is nice. But I think these are just really interesting and cute little guys. These are found in South and Central America. More locally, you have here the California Myotis californicus. Here's one. Probably near somebody's rub. These are cute little guys. They are insectivores. You eat a lot of mosquitoes, things like that flying around. This is a typical looking member of the genus Myotis, very small. About dead body about that big, very small about. But they eat a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of insects, so they're very good to have around, very handy. We go down to the lower left, as I'm looking at it. The southern long-nosed bat, Leptonectarus, Here they are pollinating what could be a blue agave. So they come back to a blue agave there. But very interesting bats, long noses. There are some bats with even longer noses. And these long-nosed bats in Central and South America pollinate a lot of flowers with very long tubular calyxes and things like that. And there's a very close association between a lot of bats and a lot of the plants that they pollinate. A lot of science into that. In the middle, we have the Brazilian or Mexican free-tailed bat, Tadera brasiliensis. This bat also has an association that pollinates sugarcane in the Caribbean. So there's a very important role there for that, for those of you that like rum, not to belabor alcohol, but the Bacardi bat, that's where this comes from. So for those of you that are familiar with that. And then lastly, we talked about the American Falls vampire. It's also called the spectral bat. This is Vampirum spectrum. This is the largest bat in the New World. And it has this really wicked set of teeth you can see here. Very large bat, and it eats lizards, small birds, other bats, mice, frogs, whatever you get its literally whatever you get its teeth on. But a very interesting bat in and of itself. And it's one of the bats I actually did look at this bat in reference to what I did in my dissertation, or sort of comparing it to fish catching bats. It's a very, very interesting bat, but not one you want to get bit by. So moving on, those a little bit microbats and megabats. So hopefully you have a little bit better appreciation of the wide variety of bats there are. But before we move on to talking about the main topic, I wanted to introduce you to some bat anatomy because it's very interesting, but and different and the same sort of as ourselves. So this is sort of a generic bat. So over here, as you look at it on your right, you have digits 1 and 2. So digit 1 is this little thumb sticking up here. Digit 2 is very closely associated with digit number 3, which forms the very leading edge of the wing here. And then you have digit 4 and digit 5. So here's digit 4, this is digit 5. Digit 5 is important because it forms sort of the width of the wing. And I'll come back to that in a minute. When you follow it down here to, they have a typical knee and tibia. And then they have one thing that we don't have is they have a membrane here between the tibia and the tail, which as humans we also don't have. But that supports this important structure here, which is called a neuropatagium, which is also sometimes called an interfemoral membrane. And that is very important. We'll talk about that later. And this interfemoral membrane is supported by a cartilaginous structure, which is bigger or smaller in various bats, called a calcone. And it's attached to the ankle. And interestingly enough, in my bat, Myotis vivesi, that's actually a synovial joint, which is very interesting. It's not in a lot of other bats, and I don't think that's ever been described in the literature. I probably should have done it myself, but it's not. But it's a very interesting structure there that supports this membrane. And then it has a hind foot, like we do, but different. And so I talked about digits 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, how they support the wings. And then they support these membranes. This is called the plagiopatagium. And this is basically just a general membrane that's suspended between digit 5 and the tibia. And then this area between digit 5 and digit 3, I'm sorry, digit 5 And digit 2 is called the chiropterygium, or the hand wing. And I may have to turn off my camera if I'm getting a bad signal. So someone let me know if I'm starting to break up. But this area here between 5 and digit 2 and 3 is called the wingtip. And this is an important structure of the wing in terms of flight and flight mechanics, which we will talk about later. And then you have the forearm here. One of the things I wanted to talk about before we move on is the hind foot. Although it looks pretty normal here, in bats, the hind limb, the femur, the knee, and the hind foot are rotated 180 degrees backwards. So if this bat was falling to the ground, this knee would be pointed up toward the bat, which is very different from how it's directed for you and I. It would be as if our knee was pointed backwards and our feet were pointed backwards. So that's very important for later as I talk about how these animals go about their business in terms of feeding. So it's a very important difference between how bats work and live and how we work and how we live in terms of biomechanics. Not even to mention the fact that they have a way with all this membrane stuff. But the hind limb is very, very different from humans. There are some animals that can rotate their limbs backwards like that. If you've ever watched a squirrel run down a tree, you've noticed that its hind limb is rotated that way, so its knee is pointing back and its foot is rotated back as it goes down. Some animals can do that. You and I cannot. We would dislocate our hip trying to do that. But bats live like that all the time. Normal for them, but not for us. So moving on. So here's a photograph. I won't tell you who this is, but you can guess. Just to show you some of these parts. So here's wing digit 5, 4, and 3. This would be the wingtip. Chiropterygium, plagiopterygium here. And then come back. This would be, here's be the forearm, here's be the hind foot, tibia, uropterygium. You can see the cow part here, a little blurry. This would be the tail, and this would be the uropterygium. So these are some of the major parts of the wing you can see in this picture. And as you can see, this bat has got its feet in the water. So, look. Let's see if I can go back here. And let's see, how do I go back?
I think if you press the left arrow, usually you could be able to go back.
Whoop. There we go. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So here is the main character, the subject of today. This is Myotis vivesi, the fish-eating Myotis of Baja, California. This is the largest species of Myotis in the world. It is monotypic, which means there are no subspecies. So in my mind, kind of a cute little thing. So it lives only in Mexico. It's the only place it's found in the entire world, which means it's endemic to the Sea of Cortez in Baja, California. You can see from this map from Paul's Mammals of North America from 1981, he shows the distribution here of Sonora, in the islands off Sonora, Baja California Norte. So those islands on the coast of Baja California and somewhat on the Sea of Cortez and on the Pacific side. And you compare it to the map from the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature from 2016. There's been quite pullback in its distribution from what we know of. There's more islands that it's inhabiting even now that they don't show in 2016, but this is part of the reason why in 2016 the IUCN put this species on its threatened list, and it remains on their threatened list. This area here, this bay of this tunnel, is called, is a biosphere reserve, which is a good thing. So it still has a fairly restricted distribution. I do not know what the current population sizes are. I don't think anybody does. I'm not sure anyone has a good idea what the population of these bats are. I would like to find out. So, what are some of the characteristics of our favorite species of bat? This species, Myotis vivesi, has a wing with what's called a high aspect ratio, which means this wingtip, which I put a circle around right here, is relatively long. So this is a shape which is characteristics of bats that fly in open, uncluttered environments, which, when you fly over the ocean, is open and uncluttered, which means they fly relatively quickly. It gives them some maneuverability. This is usually characteristics of bats that are not very maneuverable. So they're not zigging and zagging and chasing after things that require lots of maneuverability, which is probably good because I don't think these bats are very maneuverable. No one's described their flights as being very maneuverable. The plagiopterygium, which is this area here, is specialized so that the hind limbs here are relatively free of the wing membrane. So you see where the wing membrane attaches way up high here. That's important. That's an important physical aspect of this effect. Plus, energetically, this wing design seems to give them low cost of transport, which means it doesn't take a lot of energy for these animals to fly, which is very good because they fly many miles out over the open ocean. You really don't want to get tired when you're many miles out at sea and there's no place for land. Also, the fact that they may be carrying a fish or something when they catch it. So they are very specialized, but very economically designed. This is fairly unique to fish catching bats, this particular design. Other characteristics of this particular species, their hind feet. Let's see if I can go back. You can't see it here, but you can see a little bit of the hind feet there. Their hind feet are, you might say, large, really large. They're 33% of their head and body length. And are equal to the length of the tibia. In adults, the tips of the claws can be hooked over their knees. You can kind of imagine what that would be like if that was the length of your foot. How hard would that be to walk around? That would really be inconvenient. Our shoes would cost a fortune. We had to have our shoes built so they were 33% of our heavy body weight. Their toes and claws are greatly compressed laterally, which means they're thin, very thin, so that the base width to height is 1 to 8. So these are very, very thin claws. The calcar, that spur that supports the earpatagium I mentioned a while ago, is very strongly built, which is very important. And I'll mention why that's important. Unlike other Mammals, and this is really interesting to me, that in vivesi, it is white on the ventral surface of the body. If you think back to the little picture we had of Californicus, you saw its little black face, little black mask, but if you saw underneath, it was dark. And the picture we just saw of Myotis vivesi was white. This is the only Myotis that is white on the ventral surface of the body. That's really interesting. And Yeah, it's the only Myotis that's like that. And most bats are not white on the bottom, which is really, really interesting that the dental surface is white. So looking at their feet, they have really, really long toes, because here's the foot pad, and here are their toes and claws. There's some wickedly sharp claws and long toes, and very thin, that are meant to drag through the arm. So this is really, really amazingly designed feet, which leads to how they forage. So we're going a little bit into their foraging behavior. So they roost after dark like these bats, and they return during the day. It says 3 a.m., but of course it varies. They usually use the same roost for both day and night. They might return several times during the night, or they may not. They may just go out once and return, and that's it. They typically go straight to their feeding areas. From what we know, there's really not much known about their feeding behavior, to be perfectly honest. There's not a whole lot known. A little bit, but not much. They do cover pretty much long distances. In 1970, there were some scientists out on a boat. They were collecting some fish, doing some observations. They just happened to see that there were a bunch of, and how they counted 400 Myotis, I don't know. They claimed there were 400 vivesi around the boat. There's at least 7 kilometers out from shore, and they're fishing around this boat. We know that they use echolocation to kind of find where to forage for the food, which we'll get into, which are krill and fish. And we know they use echolocation also, and one of the reasons we know they use visual cues. One of the reasons we know they use visual cues is because they were hanging around this boat. And I've read this before, that they seem to like to hang around these boats when the lights are on. So, and they seem to forage in the light. So they wouldn't forage around the light if they couldn't see what was there. So they would capture the thing. This is very, very interesting. Most bats just use echolocation. These guys seem to also use visual cues, which is also very good. So as they're flying over the foraging area, that visual auditory chatter, which they could hear, the scientists could hear them chatter as they're circling over that and gaining altitude. Okay, so they capture their prey when they fly. As they approach the surface, their chatter becomes a series of short bursts. And then as they hone in on where they fly, it becomes very, very rapid and dead and audible, which is very typical of when bats are honing in on something with echolocation. It's very typical of echolocation becomes very, very, very it becomes more ultrasonic, from less to more ultrasonic, if you get what I mean. I'm not an expert in ultrasonics. That's my partner. We work with one expert in ultrasonics. So here's a really great picture. And I need to tell you a story at the end about getting pictures of these guys. The fact that this guy can got pictures of these is just outstanding. They're very difficult to get pictures of. And I'll tell you a story at the end about how difficult it is. He got these pictures from a camera he had mounted on the side of his boat at dawn and just left it running. And it's just totally random that he got these pictures. So they begin about 10 to 15 feet above the water. They fly, like I said, about 2 to 6 inches in a straight trajectory, and they just break their feet through the water and maybe in a zigzag pattern. And they grab their prey in the water, which is usually a fish. They pass it to the mouth. They usually, they can be doing eat on the fly and take it back to the beach. Very smart that they bite the head off the fish first because they don't like getting bit. Their Europetagians have been found with bite marks on them. They've been observed hovering and they've been observed following fish or shrimp. And then use their claws and tails to recover down and go down and get them. But it's interesting what they'll do is they'll just take their fish, once they get it, they'll just swing their whole foot and Europetagium up to their mouth and grab their prey out of their tail or out of their feet and eat it on the fly. So, here we go a little bit more on that. I need to move this one. There we go. So foraging posture, this is important. Here you can see it's got its little bit of tail and feet in the water. Knees, here, this is where the posture comes important. Knees facing back, for the back, foot facing forward, feet and toes down and forward, the Europetagium ready to dip into the water. You can see wings are free of the water. This is really important. You really don't want your wings in the water when you're trying to feed you. Because there are predators in the water that will eat you if you end up in the water. So the toes go in the water, and Europetagium race across the water. Then as it flies off, it rotates the feet and Europetagium upward, grabs the fish or shrimp into the mouth and eats them, or can fly back to its roosting with them. I thought something was really interesting. Another interesting observation I read was they have been observed flying into the boat mast and cable. So apparently they get sort of caught up in what they're doing and don't pay attention to where they're going. So maybe their echolocation isn't the best, but I thought that was a great observation. So what do they eat? And this is one of the things that makes them really totally unique. They eat almost exclusively on marine resources, fish and crustaceans. This is totally unique. They'll eat that anywhere in the world. They eat fish primarily from the family Myctophidae, which are land fish. And these fish are found all over the world, so it's not as if they're not available everywhere. This is a very common fish found everywhere. And these fish spend their days in the bottom of the sea floor. They go down to the bottom during the day. At night, they come up to the surface. Very convenient, I guess, for Myotis vivesi. These guys come up to the surface and they swim around the surface. Why? I don't know. But they're called lantern fish because they make their own light. They can bioluminesce, so they have like a little light somewhere around here. They're not very big, but they can be up to 6 inches. And we've done stories of Myotis vivesi about a 6-inch fish trying to eat it, been caught. But anyway, they eat these little fish and they chew their heads off and they munch on the rest of them. So, but remember, this is a marine fish. It is full of salt. So, interesting. The other thing they eat are shrimp. So here's another one. A very common shrimp that they eat is in the myceid or opossum shrimp. And like same thing, they're found the bottom, and then during the night they come up to the surface. And then the other thing we eat, and this is usually what gets caught when you're Europetagium. Now, one thing I didn't mention earlier is the Europetagium, which gets scrubbed through the water, has stiff forward-facing little hairs on it, which are like little bristles in a brush. So as that Europetagium gets dragged through the water, these little shrimps get stuck to it. And so as they come out of the water, the Myotis vivesi can just bring the Europetagium up, they can pick these little shrimp off and chew on them. So very nice, a lot of shrimp. So interesting, very unique. So roosting. And their favorite roosting spots are in Interstices in rock slides, crevices between rocks, so under rocks and the caves. They've been found under flat stones and the high tide line. They've even been found under turtle shells. But one really interesting thing about this behavior is they've been found in the same roost in these little rock caves along the shore, roosting with petrels, particularly the greased petrels and black storm petrels. And this is really unusual. You don't find bats and birds roosting. But in this case, they have been found in community. So, which is the birds are out during the day feeding, and then when the birds come back, the bats take off at night, and the bats are out at night. But they share the same roost. They didn't always found this way, but many times they're found together. There seems to be some sort of really very close association. There have been a couple of hypotheses about this, in that the petrels lay eggs and have chicks. And there's a particular species of lizard in some of these areas that will prey on them.
You're getting cut off, Brad.
Let me see if I can work better.
Yes.
Okay. So what happens is the bats chase the lizard off for some reason. They're not afraid of the lizard. So very interesting hypothesis. So here's a picture of storm petrel, just for those of you that don't know what a petrel looks like. They have this tube nose, which is used for getting rid of salt. They also eat fish, but they treat the salt in their own tube noses. The islands that they live on in the Sea of Cortez, these are really beautiful islands. These are not tropical islands with palm trees and coconuts. These are really beautiful islands with a lot of rocky slopes. So as you can see, these are some really rough places to live. So briefly in the physiology, they have very specialized kidneys. Microstructure of these kidneys resembles that of Dicotomys merriami. For those of you not familiar, that's kangaroo rat, who lives out in my local village. Has a very specialized kidney. These kangaroo rats never drink water, ever. They are able to live on a diet of dry seeds that they get in the desert and can collect all the water out of those dry seeds. The kidneys of Myotis vivesi are very similar to those. They can concentrate salt up to 650 milliequivalents. So what does that mean? I ask myself the same thing. So human kidneys can concentrate nearly 40 to 220 milliequivalents. Which vivesi can do 615. That's what? 2.5 times more. So basically, for you and I, means don't drink cereal. Salt concentrating ability means basically the bottom line is they can eat and consume marine crustaceans and shrimp and live on that because these animals are 75% seawater, which is just darn amazing to be honest with you. You and I could not do that. You and I could not go on, live in the Sea of Cortez, eat these things, and survive. But these guys can do it, and they do just fine. Thank you very much. A little bit more sort of esoteric physiology, maybe. Their wings have these things that are called hematopoietic nodules on them, which are little nodules of blood tissue. And I thought this was one of what I was doing in my dissertation. This is sort of a little interesting side note. And they occur at the intersection of elastic fibers and skeletal muscle. And I thought it was just kind of interesting because these things are could be caused by metals. One of them is vitamin C deficiency. which makes sense because all they're doing is eating these fish and these shrimp. They're not eating anything that's high in vitamin C. Could be caused by back pressure, but anyway, I just thought this was interesting. These bats are eating a very interesting, a very restrictive diet that's they're lacking in vitamin C. So basically, they're living a life on the border of starving, like most sailors used to be in the 19th century before they discovered vitamin C. So I thought this was just kind of a very interesting side note. They seem to be doing fine. A little bit on reproduction. We give birth in May and June with only a single pup, which is also really interesting. Some bats, they're usually single, but a lot of times you get two, never three. They remain attached with the mother for 3 weeks. The young never leave the roost. They double their weight in about 50 days till they can fly. The sexes may segregate. But what was also interesting after when I went to put this talk together, I went back and looked through like 35 years worth of literature, and you think people would have done more research, but no one's really done anything since this guy's dissertation in 1968. So this is an area where there's really a lot of need for research on this animal. There's just it's a shame that there isn't more known about its reproduction. And even more about its ecology than there happened. So let's talk about a little bit. There are really
Brad, you're getting cut off again.
Species. Most of them are in the genus Myotis. I will just keep going. Not much I can do. Interestingly, they're mostly in the old world. There is a new world fish catching bat called Noctilio. This bat is found. Trying to get closer to my mic and see if that helps. This bat's found in southern Mexico through Central America, called bulldog bat. What's interesting is it is not even closely related to Vivesi, but they have extremely similar morphologies. They both have large bodies. They both have large feet, large toes. For bulldog bat, the hind feet average 37% of the head body length. So it has extremely long feet. Again, long, narrow wings, pointed claws. The patagium high up on the body. But its echolocation is completely different. For Leporinus, the ultra, its echolocation is good for long distance detection, which is interesting. Vivesi better for close up. So they're really, really different in terms of how they go about doing the same thing. And here you can see a picture of Noctilio leporinus. Interesting, it's got this orange colored fur, mainly because where they roost, it's high in ammonia, which bleaches his fur out. But you can see how the feet are the same. Look at that. Long toes, but really thin. Wing membrane, got pictures of them. I couldn't get permission to get the pictures of them that I have fishing, so I had one of my coworkers draw me some pictures of how different their foraging are. You can see Noctilio keeps its tail membrane out of the water, and I like the fact that they're smiling while they forage. And just a little bit of science. These is just a simple plot of hind foot length versus head and body length. And here's Noctilio, And here is Myotis vivesi, and you can see how much bigger their hind feet are relative to head and body length compared to insectivores and carnivores and some other bats. They really are really have big feet. So some ending notes. Fishing bats are rare. Vivesi is really unique among all the bats that are in the world. They have hydrodynamic feet, and indeed they are hydrodynamic. One of the weirdest things I ever did was cut the feet off these bats and some other bats and send them to a friend of mine who teaches at Westchester University. He put them in a tank, and we found out that these bats are adapted to be drugged through the water, and they reduce drag at the water surface. So they really are hydrodynamic, as I predicted in my dissertation. They feed on oceanic fish and shrimp. They can process seawater with their very specialized kidneys. They live with birds. But that's up to them. Like I say, there's no accounting for taste. And they're just an overall very fascinating critter that I really enjoy talking about. So I'd like to thank Anita for asking me to talk to you today. I'd like to thank Psomas and my supervisor. I'd like to thank everyone for allowing me to use their photographs in this presentation, and for Cheryl for making me those lovely sketches. And thank all of you for joining me for this talk. And if you have any questions, and let's see if I can turn the video on.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. So I guess like before we take any questions, for those of you who showed up a little bit late, if you guys are in Chloe's stats class, just send me a direct message with your name and what section you're on so I can send it to her, okay? So there is one question on the chat already. Is from Mohammed. Also, you guys are more than welcome to either unmute yourself, or you guys could just put your questions on the chat. So he says, like, how did the research analyze their data, and did they use a statistical analysis or modeling method?
How did I do mine?
Yes.
Well, how did I do my analysis? What I did was I did a number of things. One, I measured lots of wing lengths, lots of digits. I measured all the lengths of the wings and digits, various digits of the hind limbs and feet, and I did multivariate statistics in terms of principal components analysis, bivariate analysis, and that's how I used those statistics to look at the various differences between fish catching bats, and I also compared them to bats that are known to be just aerial insectivores, bats that are carnivores, and bats that are what I would call surface gleaners, bats that forage on either the water surface or the ground surface. And so I compared them all and threw them into a lot of different analyses. So you saw my bivariate plot. That bivariate plot had all those bats in it, but I also did things that are called multivariate analyses, which look at lots of variables. It's very hard to explain in a few minutes, but they throw things up in what are called multivariate space and look at all the variables together, tell you which ones are important, which ones are not, and compare them all. And I did a number of those. And it kind of showed me what things were important, which were not, and what things, it's very hard to explain, what things made fishing bats unique compared to other bats. The other thing I did was, I also looked at all the muscles of the hind limbs of all these things and compared the muscles of all the hind limbs. And so I looked at the bone structure and the muscle structures and those things as well, which I didn't talk about. So lots of things went into all of it. So I hope that answers your question.
I think so. One of the students is asking if you could go back to the graph slide. I think they just want to see it.
If I could do Yes.
Okay, so it's so since you have it on here, just so I'm assuming that each point on this graph is representing one bat.
It's representing each species of bats. And what I did was I had a number of individuals and I took the mean of each. So if I had 10 individuals of one species, I took the mean or the average of the hind foot length and the average of the head and body length, and that's what's plotted here.
Okay. Thank you. Let me see. I think there's an okay, so someone is asking, how did you develop such an interest in bats?
Well, that's a good question. I've always been interested in mammals. Go back to what? Go back to it. I've always been interested in mammals. I did my master's thesis on cotton rats in California, and then when I went to USC to do my dissertation, I was going to do something more general, but I couldn't get any funding. And then my major professor had this project he was thinking about this guy. He was one of the scientists on the boat that I talked when I talked about the boat. And he said, "Well, I have this project I've been thinking about," and so I started down this road, and once I got into doing this, I really got into how interesting bats were. So I've been interested in bats ever since. So this kind of set me on the road looking at bats. So I've been interested in bats ever since. And my interest has always been, even before bats, in sort of functional anatomy and morphology and how animals are built to do what they do and how they interact with the environment, with their physical structure and how they function in the environment. So bats are a perfect thing to study for that, because when you think about it, bats do everything other mammals do, but they have to do it with wings and not 4 limbs. So they're pretty amazing creatures.
Okay, let me see. Elsa says, thank you, very cool and informative. Um, Just like, thank you so much for sharing your research with us. Okay, so Gabriella's asking, what modeling methods of statistics did you use? Question marks. I got kicked out earlier. Okay, so just so Brad doesn't have to repeat himself, I did record this lecture. I will be sending it over to Chloe and we'll be posting it on our YouTube page. But you could also look it up on our YouTube page as well, at ICRE Global, just so Brad doesn't have to repeat himself.
That's what
Um,
that.
Okay.
If they have any questions later, they can send them to you and you can send them to me, and I'd be happy to answer them
Okay.
later on.
Sounds good. Yes, so you guys could also send questions via email. I'll put it on the chat just in case you guys want to send over any emails or questions. Okay, so I did have a question. I'm just kind of very curious. So now, how do you mention how these Myotis bats, their ventral side is mostly white compared to like the rest of the other bats that we normally see? Do you think that's because they're hunting the fish, so then like the fish doesn't see them, so they kind of get camouflaged when they're going?
That's a pretty good question. My first response is yes, because when you look at other ocean predators such as sharks, they're white on the bottom. And so they're flying around at night. And I guess if the fish look up, they're not going to see them because maybe there's moonlight or something. I don't know. It's really odd. I don't know if anyone's actually looked at that. But it's a really odd thing. No other Myotis are like that. And I was trying to think, are there other bats like that? So I was trying to think of this really quickly before the lecture. I'm trying to think, what other bats are white on the bottom? Maybe pallid bats maybe are white on the bottom, and they're predators. They kind of fly around and pounce on things. So they're sort of they pounce on scorpions and other things on the ground. They're white on the bottom. So it seems to match sort of predators that are it's sort of things that would look up at and sort of blend in with what's above. But it is really kind of an odd thing for a bat to be light on the bottom like that. Yeah, it's really unusual. I'm going to have to eventually follow that up. But it's for Myotis, it's just totally different. Trying to think what other microbat might be like. Like Townsend's bat is not. Red bats are not. The spectral bat we looked at is kind of dark on the bottom. Some of the other, I was trying to think, the other vampire bats are not, of course, they don't pounce on things. Cows aren't going to carry. Trying to think of some of the other carnivorous bats like Protopterus and Trachops. They're dark. Yeah, it's a very odd coloration. And I think it'd be worth someone looking at. I don't know if anyone's actually looked at ventral coloration of bats versus how and what they're feeding on. That would be a really neat. That would be a really neat master's thesis, and I know just the guy to go to. There's a professor at Long Beach State whose specialty is I can't even say the word. Aposematic coloration in mammals. And he'd be the guy to go to do a master's thesis for that. He'd be really cool to work under. He's an mammalogist at Long Beach State now. Took my major professor's place. But that would be a great question. That would be a really good, interesting master's thesis.
Okay. The other thing that I was kind of thinking about, because obviously, like you showed us the distribution map of the Myotis, back in the day and from 2016.
Mhm.
Obviously, like we already know like a lot of even like other species, like their distribution have just shrank because, like of the habitat loss and stuff like that. Is it the same situation with these Myotis because of habitat loss, or maybe like because of, like they eat specific fish and the shrimp? Has there been a loss in maybe of their food sources? Do you know?
The main reason for their habitat shrinkage is because of feral house cats and rats being released onto those islands. So most of those islands are uninhabited by people. There's no development on them. But there are feral house cats and non-native rats like Rattus rattus and Rattus nobilis have gotten onto those islands. And those are what's causing them. Now, you saw those pictures of those islands with those rocks, and that's very easy for those rats to get around there. And those bats roost in those little rocky slides. And unless they're up on a high cliff somewhere where the rats can't get to them, it's very easy for those cats and rats to get in and prey on those bats. So that's been the main reason. I'm hoping to see a friend of mine at the mammal meetings, a guy, he just wrote the new Mammals of North America, Sergio Chacul Alvarez. And hopefully I'm going to ask him if he knows what's been going on with those bats down there. He may or may not know. But see if I can get some update information from him on that. So he may be aware. He seems to know what's going on with most mammals down there in Mexico. So hopefully I can find out a little bit more about what's been going on.
Yep.
I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed he's going to show up this year. Now that he's finally got his book published, maybe he'll show up at the meeting and I can find out what's going on.
Okay. So there's another question on the chats, saying, are there other species of bats that have mutualistic relationship with birds in the same way the Myotis has with the storm petrel?
Another good question, and I do not know. That would be I don't know. It might a literature search might pop that out. I haven't done one, but in my mind, that's pretty unique. I've never heard of it. Again, I haven't searched for it. There might be. But at the time when I was doing this work, I didn't go and look to see if there was any other mutualistic relationships. So that would be worth doing a quick literature search for, seeing if anything pops up. So that's pretty unique. Um, I don't know if anyone else has ever followed up on that. I mean, that's really old. Um, that's old literature, and I don't know if anyone's followed up on it to see if it's continued. I'm sure it has. Um, but it would be really neat to know if there's other relationships like that out there, um, and where. Um, again, there's not a lot of bats that roost in this kind of a situation that I can think of off the top of my head. Because this is, again, these bats live and roost in just really unique situations. But um, not to say that we can't have a similar situation elsewhere. But that would be worth a quick literature search just to see bird bat commensalism or mutual. That'd be really interesting to see. It's a really good question.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? You guys could unmute or put it on the chat. Give it a minute. Well, meanwhile, just while I wait to see if anything else pops up on the chat, I definitely do want to thank you for coming, for giving this talk on the bats. It was very informative. Definitely learned a little bit more about bats. And I got to learn a little bit more about the anatomy of them. Um, especially this fish eating bats. It was pretty gnarly to see their little toes, how long they are. Like, it's pretty amazing to see. They actually, like, to me, they actually look like those little cutting knives, which I
They're,
was pretty.
they're pretty unique. Like I said, they're very hydrodynamic, and like I said, when I cut them off and sent them through the mail, I literally did cut them off and send them through the mail to a friend of mine in Pennsylvania, and we put them in a drag in a tank where you measure drag. And as it turns out, they are built to cut down a special kind of drag called spray drag, which is what you get at the water air interface. Which was weird because we expect when you think of things in the water to reduce drag, you think of fish, which are round in the front and pointed in the back, right? These toes are pointed in the front and round in the back, which is the exact opposite of what you would think. And as it turns out, though, a friend of his said, "Oh yeah, right. This is how they build ships. Ships are pointed in the front and rounded in the back." So I thought this is Mother Nature, if you want to put it that way, designing things the way they should be. And as it turns out, they're not the only thing. You know what a black skimmer is? You all watch birds, black skimmer. Black skimmer beaks are pointed in the front and rounded in the back, exactly like this. So it was pretty amazing to find that out. That one. We did get a paper out of it that we published, but that was pretty amazing to find that out. That I had postulated that with absolutely no data, just thinking it's got to be right? You've got to design something that makes sense. That would be hydrodynamic. So that was pretty neat to find that out. That was a pretty cool offshoot of this dissertation. I was pretty stoked when we found that out.
Yeah. No, thanks. Yeah, I enjoyed listening to your talk. It was definitely
Well, thank you.
very educational. Um, and a lot of the students are saying thank you. They enjoyed listening to your talk.
Thank
And for you to have a good rest of your day as well.
you so much.
Yeah, and thank you again, Brad, for doing this. I really do appreciate it, and thank you, you guys, for also attending this talk. I hope you guys got to learn a little bit more about bats and why they're super important, for our ecosystem, and how they play a big role in our environment. So hopefully you guys could be able to share some of this knowledge to other people. Um, and so with that, thank you, you guys.